G'day, legends. So there's 74 days left this year, and some of the biggest fights are still yet to come. Some of our favorite fighters, they want to get back in the cage for one last payday before the Christmas break. So let us today talk about the race for the fighter of the year. Now look, the fighter of the year, it's usually a mix between popularity and strength of schedule. And clearly you could say that Alex Pereira is miles ahead in the race for fighter of the year. And don't worry, this isn't going to be an Alex Pereira slander video. I like Alex Pereira, no matter how much the live chat wants to start this terrible rumor that I'm not a fan of him. I am. Right, Alex Pereira is obviously, he won UFC 300 essentially with that sick KO. He saved UFC 303 on short notice. He was hanging out in Australia, boozing with the boys with a broken toe, rugby tackling the boys down at the club, right? And then at UFC 307, just an absolute war with Khalil Roundtree. Amazing year. You could 100% understand why people believe, and it is true, that Alex Pereira saved UFC in 2024. But even though this year has been a crazy run for Alex Pereira, there are some holes in it, okay? There is the quality of competition. You know, like, look at UFC 300, right? Jamal Hill was on short notice. He was rushed back early from his surgery. He wasn't really healed up 100%. And let's face it, Jamal Hill might be the first fraud check champion we have had certainly since Matt Serra. He never should have been a UFC title holder in the first place. And then there's the Yuri fight. Yes, Yuri was healed up for this one, but it was on short notice. Yeah, Yuri was training like a professional athlete should, Justin Tuffer, but he was just in training. He wasn't exactly locked in for a fight camp. He was just training in general. So it was still on short notice for Yuri. And then against the Khalil fight, he lost half the fight. You know, it was meant to be a domination. You know, it was one of those unfortunate fights for Alex Pereira where you actually risk a lot when you're fighting someone that you're meant to beat so handedly, because if you don't beat them so handedly and so easily, it sort of takes away from your win. So we love Poatan. We don't hate him, no matter what you guys say. I love Poatan. I'm just saying that there are some holes there, and this year, it isn't over yet. So even though it's not over, let's look at some of the other contenders. Well, Alexandre Pantoja, he's been very active. He will have fought 2 times this year, which is very normal for a champ. But then again, you know, to get a win over your 4th fight in the UFC, 10th ranked Steve Erceg, you know, you should have won that one. You know what I mean? Steve Erceg might have been rushed to the title, even I'll admit that. And then in the future, I am assuming if he does win, he's going to go out there and really just grapple the striker from Ryzen, you know, who does still, you know, practice the ancient Japanese art of fighting in a promotion that fixes fights. So not the strongest candidate for Fighter of the Year 2024, even if Alexandre Pantoja does win his fight against Kaya Sakura. The next one, chasing Alex Pereira, and I wouldn't be surprised by this one. Not that I agree with it, but I wouldn't be surprised. Valentina Shevchenko. Look, Valentina Shevchenko is now once again a fairly dominant champion. You know what I mean? She has been a champion for a very, very long, maybe one of the longest running champions in the UFC. I guess you could put her up there with John Jones if you want to consider John Jones active, but who would? The point is, and also, Valentina Shevchenko is become the first UFC fighter to complete the quest of rubies on the belt. And what you have to consider here when this race is being run is who is giving out these awards. It is the MMA media, ESPN, who are owned by Disney. Don't be surprised if woke journalism likes to throw in a curveball there and throw up a woman as the fighter of the year. I don't think she is the fighter of the year, but just think about the sort of award ceremonies that we've had for the last 5 years. Think about the direction the wind has been blowing for the last decade. And then picture the first fighter to ever complete the Ruby Belt quest, been a champion for 6 years, won her belt back at an age where they say you can't win belts back. Put all that together into modern journalism, and I bet you got a pretty bloody strong contender for Fighter of the Year for 2024. Let's move on to the next person in the race. And that's Stipe Miocic. If he beats John Jones, he will have had a win over the 3rd best fighter of all time. If Stipe Miocic beats John Jones, he'll be coming off a a massive break, coming off a loss as well, stepping back into the ring with ring rust and if he does it in dominant fashion, sleeping the third best fighter of all time. This really does put him up there, but I do not think he would have the strength of schedule or really the popularity that is required in the modern day with the modern audience to snatch UFC Fighter of the Year for 2024. Another person that I think deserves a mention is Belal Muhammad. Look, Belal Muhammad, if he goes out there and beats Shavkat Rakhmonov, the hardest prospect out there, if Belal does that, I think Belal does deserve to get mentioned in the UFC Fighter of the Year. He deserves a ton of credit. He won the belt this year in the second half of 2024. And if he does beat Shavkat, he will have been more active than someone who came into this year holding a belt, Weili Zhang, right? That deserves a whole ton of credit. Then, for his first title defense, he wouldn't have picked the easiest fight on the roster. What do I mean by that? Sean O'Malley, for his first title defense, decided to go and pick Marlon Cheeto Vera. John Jones, for his first heavyweight title defense, is going to go fight Stipe Miocic. Belal is looking down the rankings at the top 5, and he is picking the best contender that he possibly can right away. And if he goes ahead and beats that undefeated red-hot contender right away as his first title defense, that deserves a ton of credit. Huge amount. However, even if Belal Muhammad, say, spinning wheel kicks Shavkat's head off and finally gets a finish, and while Shavkat is falling backwards onto the mat, Belal somehow Mighty Mouse jumps up into the air and gets on a rear naked choke and chokes out Shavkat while he's hitting the deck, yeah? Gets him knocked out and submits him at the same time. There is no way in the world that a company owned by Disney, owned by, how do you say this? Owned by the group that owns a whole ton of stuff but doesn't, because you can't mention. There's a group that you can't talk about, and they own Disney, and they're not powerful. That's why you can't talk about them. There's no way that group is giving Belal Muhammad the Fighter of the Year. And if you can't read into that, I don't know, you got to use discernment. Moving swiftly on. So then, for my top picks of who could snatch the race away from Alex Pereira, I think it is neck and neck between these 3 people in the UFC. You have got Chad Topuria, as I like to call him. Popularity-wise, huge. In Europe, Chad Topuria is absolutely massive. And I'm talking massive. They parade him in front of these soccer teams. They go absolutely nuts. Soccer, biggest sport in the world. I know that, maybe second only to Power Slap, but the level of popularity and fame that Ilia Topuria has in Europe is insane, right? And then to beat 2 people who are on the GOAT list in the same year. Yeah, Alexander Volkanovski coming off a head kick, probably rushed back in. You could poke holes in that one. That's fair enough. However, the second one, if he does knock out Max Holloway, that would be Max Holloway on a full camp and also in his prime. The truest number 1 contender right now in the UFC, probably a stronger number 1 contender than Shavkat Rakhmonov. If JDM wasn't injured, you could see a situation where the UFC says, JDM got the win over Gilbert Burns. That's a little bit stronger than a win over Wonderboy. JDM, Shavkat fight each other to see who the rightful number 1 contender is. But JDM is injured. So instead, Shavkat can just walk on up. But Max Holloway, you couldn't get a better number 1 contender than Max Holloway. Maybe Tom Aspinall, but he's the interim champ. Max Holloway is literally the most dangerous contender in the UFC today in his absolute fighting prime. And if Ilia Topuria can take a second GOAT off the list in the same year with the popularity that he has, plus the recency bias of fighting after Alex Pereira, don't be surprised if Chad Topuria goes ahead and snatches that win from Alex Pereira. However, on the flip side of the coin for that, if Max Holloway wins, Max Holloway is the face of UFC 300 after the event. The knockout, the BMF, the 5 rounds with Gaethje. I know the BMF means nothing to the hardcores, but to the UFC media out there, the machine that just keeps on pumping out headlines, the BMF title is it's a free story to them. It's a free click for them. So it means a lot to them, the BMF championship. And if he beats an undefeated UFC champion, Chad Puria. Again, Chad Puria being on a full camp, no blemishes, undefeated, young prospect. If he beats that guy with the insane popularity that Max has in the Western Hemisphere, he has got the wins over some great fighters. He has got the win over a champion. He will have the BMF belt. He will have unified the BMF belt and the featherweight belt. Max Holloway. It could easily snatch it from Alex Pereira because there are really no holes to poke in Max Holloway's ear, like you can poke some holes in Alex Pereira's ear. So Poatan's race for this year, it might be over. And he has absolutely sprinted out of the gates in this marathon. And he has gotten himself an amazing lead. But you know what that means when you sprint it out well before the end of the race. Is he gassed out in this race now, so to speak? Has he built enough of a lead, considering we are going into some of the biggest fights of the year still to come, and his wins have sort of got little asterisks next to them, and Ilia Topuria's won't have an asterisk next to it, and Max Holloway's won't have an asterisk next to it, and if Stipe knocks out Jones, that won't have an asterisk next to it, and our Valentina Shevchenko, she's a woman working for Disney. It really buys you a lot. Let me know down there in the comments, who do you think is going to win Fighter of the Year? Let me know. Why do you think I was too harsh on Alex Pereira? I wasn't. I'm always just fair with him. That doesn't mean I hate him. If this is your first time here, I try and make an MMA video every single day. I try and go live 3 times a week. I've been pretty good at it lately. If you're already on board with the channel, hit that like button, and it's Friday, so it's the last video for the week. So until this week, I won't be live streaming this weekend. Until Monday or until Sunday afternoon's live stream, I'll see you then. But you guys have yourselves a bloody good weekend. We'll catch up soon. See ya.